What's your first instinct when something goes wrong at work? Like someone making a rude comment or maybe a major mistake being uncovered. Do you react impulsively or do you pause and thoughtfully respond? Reacting often feels natural in the moment, but if we think about it, it rarely leads to the outcome we want. Responding, on the other hand, is about choosing your actions in a way that aligns with your goals. Today, we're unpacking the power of responding versus reacting and why mastering this skill is really essential for your growth as a leader. So let's get into it. Let me first break down what I mean by reacting versus responding. While they may seem like the same thing, they're actually pretty different, especially when you're in a leadership role. Reacting is that gut impulse. It's acting without taking time to think. It's driven by immediate emotion, often frustration, anger, defensiveness. But responding, on the other hand, is more deliberate, and it's about pausing, assessing the situation, and then making a choice based on what you believe would be the best outcome, not just what you feel in that moment. When you respond, you're aligning your actions with the outcome that you want. And that outcome could be solving a problem, or keeping harmony on your team, or simply just handling a challenge with grace. As an engineering leader with nearly 2 decades in tech, I've had my share of intense moments where I had to choose between reacting and responding. And early in my career, I realized how important it is to stay calm and collected instead of letting impulsive reactions take over. But that didn't come naturally. It was something I developed by learning from my own mistakes and by closely observing leaders that I admired. I noticed that the most respected leaders were rarely the ones who reacted impulsively. Instead, they paused, assessed, and responded more thoughtfully. So over the years, I've seen firsthand how this approach doesn't just resolve immediate issues, but it actually defines the culture of your team and shapes your career as a leader. Imagine this. A team member makes a mistake that causes an outage. Reacting in that moment could mean pointing fingers or venting frustration, or maybe even sending off an email full of blame while copying so many people on the email. But a response would be taking a moment to cool down, then addressing the issue with the goal of solving it and figuring out how to prevent it from happening again in the future. It's a subtle difference, but the impact is huge. And that's why I was saying earlier that when we respond, we're thoughtfully aligning what we say and what we do with the outcome that we desire from that adversity or situation. But when we react, we're just simply letting emotions out. There are so many scenarios like this in the workplace. Think of times when you receive critical feedback. You might feel attacked and you might even shut down or react in a way where you argue defensively. But if you respond, you can see it as an opportunity to improve. You might not agree with all of the feedback, but responding means you'll take a moment to process it, ask clarifying questions, and potentially even find something constructive and actionable that will make you an even better leader. One of the key reasons I value responding over reacting is that our reactions are often influenced by our own triggers, and we all have triggers. Those little things that push our buttons, often in unexpected ways. And I think triggers are fascinating because they often have little to do with the actual situation at hand. Instead, they're rooted in our past experiences or our personal insecurities or things we've carried with us over time, sometimes without even realizing it. Maybe it's a memory of being criticized by a parent or a teacher, or it's the fear of not being good enough. These feelings can bubble up in the heat of the moment, making a situation feel much bigger or more personal than it really is. That's why it's so important to recognize when something is a trigger. It was only last year when I became so aware and conscious of my triggers and started pausing when I feel I'm getting emotional or reactive. And I learned to ask myself, is this about the situation in front of me, or is this touching on something deeper? Acknowledging something as a trigger helped me separate the emotion from the reality, giving me some clarity that I needed to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. A personal trick I use is writing down my initial reactions as if I'm responding to the person who triggered me. This simple practice allows me to vent in a safe place without anyone else seeing. Later on, when I look back at what I wrote, I'm almost always grateful it didn't see the light of day because it wasn't aligned with who I am or how I actually want to show up. Another classic scenario I want to touch on is email. How many times have you read an email when you're frustrated and you read a totally different tone into it than what was intended? It's so easy to misinterpret things when we're emotional. Sometimes I'll reread an email after cooling down and realize that what I initially thought was a criticism was actually more neutral or even constructive. And it's a reminder that taking a moment to respond thoughtfully can save you from major misunderstandings. Now, let's look at some real life examples of the different types of adversity we encounter at work. One common challenge is personality clashes, dealing with rude or dismissive people, which can be incredibly frustrating. And you might feel triggered by someone making a simple comment in a meeting, saying something like, "This was done poorly." It's easy to be defensive, to snap back and react in a way where you want to defend yourself immediately, maybe even resentfully. But responding involves taking a breath and either asking clarifying questions or pulling that person aside later on to learn more about where they were coming from. And I also want to say when someone says something rude, insulting, or disrespectful, they're the ones who look bad in that moment. But when you react impulsively to them, suddenly you share that spotlight and not in a good way. However, when you choose to respond thoughtfully, it's really an opportunity for you to shine because it shows your composure, your professionalism, your emotional intelligence, and it really sets you apart as a leader. Another type of adversity you might encounter as a leader is when people make mistakes. Let's say there's a major project setback because someone missed an important, obvious step in testing. Reacting might look like an emotional outburst or blaming someone on the spot. Responding, on the other hand, means taking a calm approach to first address the issue, figure out a plan forward, and then working with the team to come up with a plan on how to avoid this from happening next time. So you're still holding people accountable. I'm really never saying that you wouldn't hold people accountable because that's very important. But the approach you're taking here is constructive versus emotional. Now, I want to acknowledge that it's normal to feel emotions like frustration or anger. And in fact, it's healthy to acknowledge them instead of suppressing everything. It's okay to feel those things, but what matters is what you choose to let out. Another thing to keep in mind is that you cannot take back a reaction. Once you react, the impact is out there, and the consequences can be so high because it can affect your professional image and affect how your team sees you. Your team learns from your behavior, whether you're aware of it or not. So if they see you reacting impulsively, they might start to do the same, and that would create a cycle of negativity and tension. And as a leader, it's essential to model the behavior you want to see on your team. I'll be the first to admit that this isn't easy. And I've had moments throughout my career where I reacted impulsively, and even years later, I remember those reactions. And they're not the example I want to set. But every time I remind myself to pause, to choose a response over a reaction, it really strengthens my ability to handle future challenges with grace. So if you're faced with a tough situation at work, whether it's a personality clash or a triggering comment, take a moment and ask yourself, do I want to react or do I want to respond? Think about the outcome you're aiming for. Is it just to release frustration or is it to find a solution? As a leader, every interaction is a chance to build or destroy trust, to inspire or discourage your team. And remember, we're all human and we're all learning. So the goal isn't perfection, it's actually progress. So the next time you're in a tough situation, pause and choose to respond with intention. And you'll be amazed at the difference it can make, not only for your career, but for the respect you earn from those around you. Now it's your turn. Think about a time when you reacted instead of responding. What was the outcome? And if you had the chance, how would you handle it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a conversation. And if this video helped you see things in a new light, please share it with a friend or a colleague and let's continue to grow and support each other in our leadership journeys.